aim of my present lecture is to sensitize the environment regarding what is the requirement of hospital helipads, why they are required, what we need to do as a hospital to take on board hospital helipads, whether it is construction of a new helipad or it is construction of refurbishment of an old helipad. With the sustained increase in demand for emergency pre-hospital care across the world, increased number of traffic jams on the roads, people have increased ability to pay, health insurance have penetrated much more than before, and in the community there is increased awareness about better healthcare outcomes which needs to be achieved for an individual. More so, there is increased availability of air med evac vis-a-vis previous times. So a knowledge of hospital helipads becomes more pertinent in present day affair. I'll be covering my topic into 4 parts. Part A will deal with pre-hospital care. Part B is air medical transport. Part C will deal about hospital helipads, the design requirements of it. And Part D is what is the policy of hospital helipads in India as of now. Now, emergency medical services. The philosophy behind emergency medical services is appropriate intervention at appropriate time. The pre-hospital care or emergency medical services should be sought and safe and should never be prolonged. The patient should be moved to the definitive care treatment facility at the earliest. The aim of the treatment is to produce a neurologically intact patient, only provide life and limb-saving medical attention, and reasonable quality of life is the ultimate aim of providing emergency medical services and pre-hospital care. But we need to take care of 2 issues: when to intervene and when not to intervene. It is a very important decision. Medical services, whether we want to stay or play or we want to scoop and run, the decision has to be decided immediately on the spot. To define EMS is a system that organizes aspects of medical care pre-hospital and out of the hospital environment. It is planned or intended to be transported to the hospital for further treatment. As I said, it should be short and sweet. The patient has to be transported to the definitive treatment facility as early as possible. Wherein out of hospital emergency care, such intent or planning may be absent in that. Emergency medical services also lays the foundation for effective disaster response and management of mass casualty incidents. Now coming on to what are the components of emergency medical systems. This is an emergency system framework devised by World Health Organization. It defines emergency medical system into 3 categories. Actions taken at the scene on the left bottom side. In the middle you can see the transportation part of it, and in the end you can see what is the management which is done at facility level. And we can also divide the hospital response into pre-response, then pre-hospital care, emergency department response, critical care which is received inside the ICU and wards, and further rehabilitation of the patient. Defining pre-hospital care, it is a system of coordinated response and emergency medical response involving multiple personnel and multiple agencies. That is why the things become important. It is a multi-stakeholder involvement that provides emergency medical care which is activated by a call for help after the serious incident or serious illness which has taken place at home or outside the hospital. While the focus of pre-hospital healthcare is emergency medical care, and it is very much more than a ride to a hospital. I think you can see on your slide the components of emergency medical care. The one in amber shows the initial incident recognition, then access to the healthcare services by way of making a call, then dispatch of teams. The first responder response, basic life support is provided. If the transportation have advanced life support is also provided, and the patient is transported via ground or air medical transport. The patient reaches the emergency medical department. The important point here to see is that the time taken should be minimum when the patient is transported from the site of incident to the emergency department. The helipad facility should have access to emergency department in terms of time. In simplified terms, a call is received, the team is dispatched, first responders may take the patient to the hospital in car or buses or whatever vehicle is available, or ambulance services in the form of road ambulance or heli ambulance. The patient is stabilized en route or might not be stabilized en route, and the patient is transported to the hospital for definitive care provision. Now the question comes, why do we need a pre-hospital care? Well, not many studies have been done in India or abroad. I could lay my hand on few of the studies, like assessment of pre-hospital emergency medical services in low-income settings, which is much more applicable to us. Some of the diseases like injuries, cardiac arrest, stroke, sepsis, obstetric emergencies are time sensitive illness. So that means golden hour approach applies more in, also contributes significantly to the premature mortality and disability. Now reasons for death in these cases are inadequate pre-hospital care, which in our settings transport is not available also. The patient has to move 20 kilometers before they reach the healthcare facility. And mind you, 80% of the people will be walking to reach the healthcare facility. Now, evidence shows both ways. It also negatively affects the outcome of medical and obstetric and pediatric emergencies if pre-hospital care is absent. And the other way around also, the availability of the pre-hospital care causes tremendous 25% reduction in trauma-related mortality rate alone. Another study which has been a systematic review or meta-analysis which has been carried out, majority of the trauma deaths in developing world occur outside the hospital. Preliminary studies have shown that the pre-hospital trauma symptoms have improvement in mortality. They reduce mortality and particularly in our income settings. So all the more pertinent for we people to know what is pre-hospital care and how can we improve that pre-hospital care. Coming on to fundamental principles of pre-hospital care, an efficient pre-hospital trauma care should be simple to implement. It should not be a complex system which takes years to implement, as it happens with most of the healthcare policies in India. We make a very good policy, a very complex policy, but the implementation part of it is still lacking. It should be sustainable. It should not be a one-time affair. It should be practical, efficient and flexible according to the circumstances, according to the different types of evac which happens. More importantly, the pre-hospital care has to be integrated into the country's existing healthcare systems. It cannot stand in isolation. This is a very important point. It has to be integrated into public health. More so, since transportation and the golden hour period concept is very important in these issues, integrated with the transportation infrastructures also. Now, the effective systems lay the foundation of emergency care. That includes all the emergencies, maybe it pediatric emergencies, medical emergencies, obstetric emergencies. But as of now, we are limited to only a few emergencies which are life-threatening. We have not yet moved to attending pediatric, adult and medical emergencies by view of air. Transportation of severely ill patient to a definitive care facility should be as quick as possible. The golden hour period, the mortality as we saw, definitely improves. Transport is best done by using an ambulance that is appropriately designed and equipped with staff. It can be a road ambulance, it can be air ambulance. We already know that most of the world population has no access to any formal pre-hospital emergency care. Coming on to air medical transport, definitely needless to say, air medical transport definitely reduces the time required for definitive care and maximizes the patient's chances of making a successful recovery. The patients have realized this fact that pre-hospital care is important. And as of now, no federal or government facilities are available, but yes, private facilities are available for people to use pre-hospital care, those who can afford it. We have served in armed forces in remote locations, and this can be a great motivator. If the person who is sitting on the post realizes that he will be evacuated via air in case of any problem, the motivation level goes up. So in remote locations, more so, where only means of reaching a healthcare facility is by air, air medical transport becomes all the more important. Now the cost of these are extremely high. It is to the tune of $2,000 per transportation per patient in US. In UK, it can range from £15 to £2,000 per mission. In India, it is generally 2.5 to 18 lakhs depending upon which aircraft you are taking, what distances you are intending to travel by means of air. To define air medical services is a comprehensive term which covers use of air transportation, be it fixed wing or be it a helicopter, to move patients to and from healthcare facilities and accident scenes. It is not only moving patients from accident scenes to healthcare facilities, it is other way around also, where road move is not permitted or it is very difficult to happen. The personnel who provide emergency care should be well qualified and should be able to provide a comprehensive pre-hospital and emergency and critical care, whether it is on-site, whether it is en route or with it reaching the emergency department. Beginning of air transport to provide medical evacuation start dates back to World War I, but the role was dramatically expanded during Korean and Vietnam wars. That means initially the medical evacuation by air was limited to only military authorities. But later on the aircraft began to be used as civilian emergencies also. And now we can see, we have private healthcare medical evacuation facilities, but they are available for civilians also. Helicopters are not only a means for the patient to reach definitive care treatment. The other way around it also can happen. The specialist care can be brought to the scene and the patients can also be transported to specialist hospitals. We can use a fixed wing aircraft which are used for long distances in case the patient is intended to be shifted to a definitive care facility either from the site of accident or from one facility to another also. Since air transport is very precious and very expensive as of now, so we need to define what are the indicators for air transport. Most important condition is whether the patient's condition want air medical transport or not. So we need to define protocols and carry out training to ensure that appropriate triage criteria are applied. Everybody and anybody cannot use air transport for the purpose of convenience. Whether to take off or not to take off the flight, crew safety and patient safety is of single most important factor on deciding whether the flight will take off or not. A general rule which is generally used is if there are a pilot and two medical crew, all the three persons are required to say yes that we can fly. Even if one person says no, the flight will not take off. So it is called 3 to go and 1 to say no. Air ambulances like ground ambulances should be equipped with medical equipment and they are also vital for monitoring and treating injured patient also. The common equipments which can be present in air ambulances includes medications, ventilators, ECGs and monitoring units. CPR equipment and stretchers are also available in different kinds of air ambulances. Air ambulance should be medically staffed and equipped to provide medical care in flight and route also. Well, there are air ambulances, we should not call them air ambulances, but they are only used for transportation of patients where non-medical people are there in the aircraft and it is just used for the purpose of transportation of patient from the site to the definitive care treatment facility. Military organizations and NATO refers to med-evac when medical personnel are present on board, and when no medical personnel is present on board, it is called CAS-evac. We know that the ground ambulances receive priority over any kind of issues. They can have sirens, they can jump red lights. So similarly, air traffic controller which is present on the airport grants special treatment to air ambulances also. They can take the call sign as med-evac, which was previously called as lifeguard. And they also receive priority in takeoff or landing, whichever the case may be. Now coming on to the standards, well, I could not find standards in India which look after the accreditation of air ambulances, but yes, the Commission on Air Medical Transportation System in US have standards for accreditation of air ambulance services which only applies in United States and which includes the requirement for an air ambulance company to own and operate its own aircraft. This accreditation is also voluntary. Coming on to what are the associations and organizations which deals with aerospace medicine or construction of helipads and related issues. Aerospace Medical Association and Association of Air Medical Services USA, Director General Civil Aviation in India, Indian Aerospace Medicine Institute which is located in Bangalore looks after the medical aviation part of it. Indian Air Force, we all know that looks after the med-evac part of it, and Indian Society of Aerospace Medicine also contributes towards the development of med-evac through air in India. What is the most common indication for air transport in India? And it was found to be cardiovascular diseases. Maybe the reason is because cardiovascular diseases are the most in number. Then the second in line is central nervous system diseases, and the overall complication rate was just 5 to 3%, and there was no transport related delay in that particular med-evac. Now, what are the goals for aeromedical transportation? It is an on-site response, it should be rapid, it should be within golden hour, and it should be able to provide advanced life support. It also facilitates inter-facility transfer. It decreases the out-of-hospital time. The patient is quickly moved towards the definitive care treatment facility, and it also decreases the depletion of resources. Helicopters and air evac is costly and it is a very precious affair. So the guidelines, some of the operational guidelines are that land ambulance is taking more than 30 minutes to the scene and to the trauma center also. The patient's needs cannot be met by the people who are there in the air ambulances. They are medics. Much more complicated or much more definitive care is required by the patients. A large number of patients are there which needs to be evacuated. We need to scoop and run definitely. Or the medical staff which is present that the patient needs to be evacuated, then the patient should be evacuated. We need to have some clinical guidelines in the form of field trauma triage guidelines, the medical condition of the patient, the environmental condition which is available, whether the flight can take off or not, what is the obstetrical condition, whether the lady can move in flight or not, and similarly if deemed appropriate by the staff. A similar criteria of adult trauma alert criteria by Holmes Regional Medical Center, Melbourne, Florida is there flashed on your screen. Any one of the criteria which is mentioned on the slide, if present, the patient should be air evacuated. Some of these are airway resistance required beyond administration of oxygen, heart rate beyond 120, systolic less than 90, and GCS equal to 4 or less. Two of the following criteria are present: respiratory rate greater than equal to 30, sustained heart rate greater than equal to 120, GCS equal to 5, major gloving injury, gunshot wound, one long bone fracture, ejected or thrown away vehicle, and steering wheel deformity are some of the things which warrant air evacuation. Scene selection is very important. Whether the aircraft can land safely or not, it is a very important criteria. Now the pilot has the final say whether he will be landing an aircraft or not. Assigning a landing site coordinator who is aware about the intricacies of taxiing the aircraft to the site and landing and take off the aircraft, we should be able to assign a landing site coordinator. The minimum area should be 100 feet into 100 feet, and it should be clear of wires. It should be a flat surface with no debris and gravel also. Scene safety in the form of quick reaction teams is very important. We should be able to stop vehicular and pedestrian traffic. We should be close the doors, secure any loose equipment. Some of the do's and don'ts working around the helicopter: do not approach the aircraft. Approach only from the side. Approach from the downside of the hill. Carry equipment horizontally or below the waist. We should be able to secure clothing, blankets and equipment, or whatever loose equipment which is available. We need to see the effect of vibration on clinical condition. We need to see the effects of noise. A lot of noise is made in rotary wing aircrafts. The humidity decreases, the fatigue sets in. If we are traveling high up in the air with fixed wing aircrafts, G forces in non-pressurized aircrafts matter, and definitely atmospheric pressure do create conditions which warrant attention by the medical personnel. We should also be aware about some of the aeromedical physiology of gas laws like Dalton's law, Boyle's law, Henry's law, and what is a Bernoulli effect, and how does the helicopter get affected by a Bernoulli's effect. What are the implications of these, and how can we compensate for these variations in pressures, temperature, and other issues which we discussed. Coming on to transport medicine, preparation for flight is very important as the flight itself is. There are two issues to it. We should be able to prepare the crew for flight safety. Patient packaging is very important during flight. The patient needs to be secured properly. Before takeoff, cabin safety briefing is very important, which takes precedence over any other issue. Now the design of a heliport should be both safe and friendly for helicopter operations. This is the primary objective which needs to be met. Heli accident or helicraft crash is a very big issue, and the heli safety needs to be taken care of first before the flight takes off or lands. Another issue is a proximity to the emergency department. Now, if the patient requires another mode of transportation after disembarking from the helipad to the definitive care treatment facility, the whole purpose of air transport is defeated. So, proximity to the heliport, to the emergency department is of prime importance. Types of helicopters that can use helipads: generally hospital helipads are predominantly used by ambulance helicopters, which are small to medium size. They do not exceed length more than 15 meters and a maximum weight of 3.5 ton. But we can't be very sure because search and rescue helicopters can be up to 23 meters in length and 15 ton maximum weight. While the design criteria for a hospital helipad should consider what is the heaviest and what is the largest heli which is landing on that particular helipad. So ambulance helicopters generally land once per day, but may land several times a day during hospitals which are located near the coast or in mountains or possible sites like major railway junctions or airports. Coming on to the planning considerations, we already discussed the time taken to ED transport is very important. Rooftop helipads are the ideal. We should have a trolley transfer bay with a dedicated lift which is located just below the heliport level. It should not be at the level of heliport. It should be at least minimum 2 meters located below the helipad. It should be connected via a short ramp. In case of hospitals, generally stairs are not recommended. At the ground level helipad, there should be a covered walkway which should be available, and it should be covered by a concrete or a tarmac pathway which is connected between the two for the ease of transportation. A rotor downwash which takes a toll and destroys what all is available on site. All helicopters create a downward flow of air from the rotor system known as rotor downwash. Now the severity of the downwash which is felt by the helipad or neighboring structures depends upon the mass of the helicopter. How big and how heavy is the helicopter, the diameter of the helicopter, the design of the rotor disc, and how close the helicopter is to the surface. We should also consider dissipating noise using baffles for intervening buildings. We should insulate buildings and fitting double glazed in vulnerable zones also. And we should limit the night operations by transporting patients only which are critically ill during odd hours, so that no disturbance to the general public is there. Coming on to the options which are available to us for selection of site, we can choose a traditional ground level variation of the helipad. We can choose a rooftop helipad. By definition, a height of more than 3 meters is required for a helipad to be called as elevated or rooftop helipad. And similarly, purpose-built helipads which is less than 3 meters above level are also required. As you can see on your slide, the topmost picture on your left side shows a ground level helipad. Similarly, a raised molded helipad which is a variation of a ground helipad only, and the purpose-built raised structure which is less than 3 meters is shown on the picture on the bottom left of your screen. The ground level might be a parking, and a raised level structure above the parking may be created for helicopter to land. Something about ground level helipad, they are least expensive to construct and operate, but they take as much more space and land comes at a premium. More so, we also require a clear, firm landing area which is free from all obstruction. We have to have at least 2 corridors from the edge of the helipad for landing of aircraft and for taking off aircraft. So that is the approach, and the takeoff area should be clear. From the perspective of aviation and long-term planning perspective, we already discussed that it is the best position on the roof of the tallest building. Rooftops are generally an unused space, but we can't say that in present context because air conditioning plant, HVAC plants are located on the top rooftop. But as we saw in the previous slide, less than 3 meter height helipads can be constructed above an air conditioning plant. Ground areas comes for a premium cost and may be used for another buildings or creation of amenity areas or park areas. Needless to say, helipads on rooftops are more expensive. We need to raise the helicopter approach and departure path by several stories is raised. This obviates the need of clearing of bushes and trees also. This reduces the environmental impact, particularly noise and effects which is felt at the ground level are not there. There is a greater choice for unobstructed path, and the aircraft itself experiences less turbulence on elevated helipads. Issues like aircraft and public security, freedom from obstructions, provision of into wind approaches, minimizing downwash, reducing the impact of trees and bushes, and preservation of trees and bushes are the easiest to happen in elevated and rooftop helipads, and it is most difficult to be applied in ground level. Similarly, the cost issues, the running cost issues, the mandatory requirements of firefighting equipment and another manpower equipment which is more difficult in rooftop helipads, and it is much easier to implement in ground level helipads. Now most hospitals will be located within easy reach of a licensed aerodrome where refueling services will be easily available. But if for reasons of convenience or economy, if the helipads or the hospital can arrange a facility, then we need to have barrels via an integrated pump which can be utilized for refilling of the helicopters. Magnetic field deviation is not much of an issue considering the construction of heliports are generally done by aluminium. But it might so happen that steel is used and electrical cabling and water pipe might generate magnetic field. So it should be encouraged that magnetic north is initially established to be true for the site, and this should be revalidated before and after key strategies of construction also. And if any magnetic field deviation cannot be corrected, then this should be notified to the helicopter operators which are operating on that particular site. Coming on to the design, we discussed that it should be made of aluminium alloy, and it should have a minimum incidence of galvanic corrosion. It should be designed to resist the local wheel skidding actions which happens. What is the overall load bearing capacity of the landing area? It is generally a function of the maximum takeoff mass which is available. as we discussed, the heaviest helicopter which is intended to operate on that particular site, and this should determine the appropriate dimensions of the site and what is the weight bearing capacity of that particular. Access to the heliport, ramps and stairs should be provided. Stairs are not recommended if we are considering a helipad in a hospitals. There should be a place for embarking and disembarking teams should be present. They are not required to pass around the helicopter tail or rotor. A separate area as seen on the figure on the left side should be available for them. In this figure, the separate area is on the same height, but it is recommended that the medical teams and patients and the area should be at least 2 meters below the landing area of the helipad. There should be minimum 2 access or egress routes, preferably diametrically opposite. If a ramp is present, it should be minimum 10 meters in length and it should not exceed a gradient of 1 in 220 meters. Now coming on to the visual cues, when the helicopter is landing, the pilot has to be sure where he lands. Wind direction indicator is an important visual clue which helps the pilot in landing the aircraft. Now the display of the wind direction is also provided. The windsock should be easily visible to the pilot. It should be at least located at a height of 200 meters on the approach hover. The windsock should be made of a truncated cone of a suitable lightweight fabric which is minimum 1.2 meter in length, the bigger diameter of 0.3 meter and a smaller cone diameter of 0.5 meter. Generally, a single color windsock is also okay, but it should have a good background for a single color to be used. A background is constantly changing, then we might use a combination of colors of like orange and white, red and white, and black and white schemes could be selected. There is no as such hard and fast rule. It depends upon the contrast which is available to the windsock. The port is intended to be operated at night, then the windsock will need to be illuminated. Now coming on, once the helicopter lands, there should be helicopter land marking which are available on the picture on the left hand side shows the area in the green. This is the complete helipad area which should be available. The area in the yellow circle is the target zone and the figure with the H is the landing zone. The dimensions are mentioned on the slide, and when you don't want an helicopter to land on a particular site, then the figure on the right hand side helps. When you are considering helicopter landing area at night, then as shown in the figure, perimeter lighting with a lit touchdown base should be available with a green cross. The heliport lighting scheme is intended to provide visual clues to the pilot throughout the approach and landing maneuver. Night landing is very difficult, and the complete lighting system should be always fed from a UPS system. Various ancillary services which are available should be available are firefighting services with local firefighting authorities involved, life-saving medical equipment in the form of an ambulance, standby ambulance with a nursing assistant or a medic should be present, and emergency planning for in case of any kind of emergency, the landing is not proper, there is some snag in the helicopter, and various emergency procedures should be predefined and written SOP should be present at the helipad sites. Minor equipment repair, again depending upon whether you have the facility to repair that helicraft or not, you can consider that also. The minimum area of which is 200 meter long and at least 30 meter wide is required for the ground level landing sites. A 9 meter side equilateral triangle comprising of 1 meter wide lines either constructed from paving or consisting of shallow trench filled with heavy crushed stone pallets painted with white as shown on the slide on the figure on the left hand side is required. The landing point should be on a firm ground, but a 18 meter paved circle should be made as shown in the yellow color for easy access towards the helipad site. Finally, coming on to some heliport checklist which should be available, like the dimensions should be proper, the surface landing area should be on an elevated helipad, the helideck lighting should be appropriate, the environment should be considered, enough visual aids or cues should be available. If one windsock does not suffice the purpose, nobody stops you from using 2 windsocks. Obstacle protected surface, if any obstacles which cannot be removed which are present, they needs to be lighted or they needs to be made visible. Rescue and fire services provision, extinguishing media should be present, platform facility should be developed, PPE, media discharge test, firefighting accommodation, personal protective equipment and firefighting staff, safety and competency level. This checklist is not exhaustive but an indication of what all should be present at a hospital helipad. Coming on to the final part of my presentation, what is the hospital helipad policy in India? Director General Civil Aviation is responsible for the overall helipad operations. So one guideline which has been released in 2006 regarding construction of helipads, I don't see any merit in this particular document because this is a very sketchy document which is available. And another document which has come out in 2014, a checklist for surveillance or inspections of seasonal helipads is also available. As I hail from Maharashtra, so I will talk about helipad policy which is available in Maharashtra. Talks about the selection of site should be either a good grass surface or it should be a solid surface which should be free from loose debris. The chosen site should be at least 52 meters by 52 meters. The landing area should be 14 meter by 14 meter and it should have a weight bearing of around 5700 kilograms. The takeoff and approach path is shown on your picture which is on the top of the slide. The touchdown area shown in the white on the picture on the left and left bottom side with the dimensions of 1.8 meter into 3 meter, and it should be an obstruction free distance of 245 meters for takeoff and approach path. Regarding development of a helicopter landing site in any of the states, the responsibility has been assigned to the district collector. The district collector might assign the job to for creating a temporary or permanent helipad to the public works department under him, and a no objection certificate as per Annexure 6 is required to be signed by the district authority and should be forwarded to Director General Civil Aviation prior to the commencing of the flight also. The helicopter operator shall be responsible for the safety of all operations, passengers and people on ground. Cannot say that my only task is to fly the chopper and take the patient away, rest the responsibility lies with the district collector or somebody else. No. Operator has to be responsible for making all the security and anti-hijacking arrangements which are required to be made at a helicopter landing site. The rescue and firefighting equipment which the district administration should provide 45 minutes prior to the arrival of the helicopter and 30 minutes after the departure. A fire tender which can discharge foam at the rate of 500 liters per minute and which can carry 50 kgs of dry chemical powder should be available. An ambulance which can carry 2 paramedics and a medical officer in case VIP visits is contemplated. A quick reaction team which should be available for the security purposes, and communication facility from the helipad to the district headquarters or disaster management control room should be available. Now the Director Civil Aviation of Maharashtra will be responsible for providing approvals for all operations taking place in the particular helicopter landing site in the state of Maharashtra. They also should conduct safety audits from time to time, and they are responsible for updating the specifications as and when required also. They should also prepare a master list of helicopter landing sites which are available in Maharashtra. As of now, few authorized sites are available, but the Directorate of Civil Aviation has earmarked around 60 odd sites which are potential helicopter landing sites in the state of Maharashtra. Finally, summarizing what all we discussed, long distance air travel for medical needs is on increase worldwide because of the reason we discussed, and it also necessitates monitoring interventions during transport by trained personnel also. Most of the persons who require air evac are mild to moderate. They can safely travel with the normal cabin seats with some assistance we also should consider while designing the air ambulances. And on case-to-case basis, the cost of medical transportation may seem expensive initially, but when compared to the ground transportation and to the outcome indicators which are there, even in comparison to the actual cost of the treatment, it is very cost effective and decreases the time to the treatment, and the survival benefits with the patient, the motivation level which the patients and the quality of life are added to the life of the patients.